Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for N4A's first installment of the summer webinar series titled Collaboration Between Athletic and Campus Advisors. My name is Christine Ball, and I will serve as the moderator for this session. If you have a question throughout the course of the live webinar, feel free to use the questions feature on the bottom right of your screen. Please note, I will moderate a brief Q&A session at the conclusion of today's webinar. Now for our session. We are pleased to have with us today Mr. Will Lewis, Lead Academic Advisor at the University of Georgia, Dr. Lisa Rubin, Associate Professor, Kansas State University. Dr. Rubin and Mr. Lewis are recipients of the 2020 N4A Research Award. The Research Award is presented annually by N4A to raise awareness for the need for updated research on educating and serving student athletes. Dr. Rubin and Mr. Lewis, congratulations. At this time, I'd like to pass things off to Dr. Rubin so she can kick off today's presentation. Dr. Rubin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks to N4A for this honor. We are very excited to present our work today, and I'm excited. I've been a member of N4A for a long time, and I'm thrilled that I get to collaborate with Will, who is a new member for N4A. So he is going to be controlling our presentation slides, so bear with us if we seem to be slightly off, but we're going to do our best to stay smooth and get time for questions at the end. So our study, we've discussed a lot of different things to get to this point, but we wanted to determine how athletic and campus advisors collaborate for athlete success in the classroom and in life. Will is a primary role advisor, and I'm a faculty advisor that used to be an athletic advisor. So we've had all three of the roles that we interviewed in our study. And when we talk about campus advisors in this study, we talk about both primary role, or what you might call a professional advisor, a major advisor on campus, as well as a faculty advisor. So we refer to these in our slides as CA for campus advisor and AA for athletic advisor. When you see that, that's what those mean. So we will go ahead and dive into kind of the foundation, advisor roles and perceptions in the literature. We see that campus advisors are not often familiar with eligibility rules, and they may not have any connection whatsoever to the athletic department. We see a variety of different spaces on campus separating campus advisors from athletic advisors. They may not be nearby each other and not see each other doing the work in action. Often athletic advisors feel misunderstood about their work and the pressures that they face because they don't think people know what they're doing. And other perceptions, athletes don't necessarily understand why they themselves have two advisors, and that's not always clear from the start. There's a lot of differentiation in titles. So you might see, as Friedman shared here, academic counselor, coordinator, or specialist, or in case a new one, athletic eligibility specialist from recent literature, rather than using the term advisor in athletics. And then there's a difference in reporting lines. How do you look, how are you perceived if you report to the athletic department versus the provost or academic affairs? In terms of collaboration and communication, there's a lot of literature out there that there's great communication and collaboration between like advisors and career services, because there's a lot of synergy in helping students plan their academic career around their future career plans. There's also some information on libraries. So we looked at library research, and we saw that a lot of the librarians that liaise with subject areas, like go out to the colleges, speak to classes, get classes to come to them, and those sort of things also create that synergy between units. And then we want to make sure when we look at collaboration and communication that there's cross-training. So you don't want to reduce, you don't want to duplicate efforts. We don't want advisors doing the same thing when students go to one and then go to another. How do we reduce the duplication of effort while helping students succeed? And then something really important, this came out of a study on Division II institution that did a lot of cross-campus collaboration. You cannot offer everything to your students in one unit. You have to use resources on campus to be successful and help your students. So here's other resources that benefit students who have learning disabilities. Obviously, a lot of athletic departments liaise with what they have a student access center or disability center. So that's really helpful because, again, you cannot do it all with a small staff. You may not have learning specialists on your staff. Again, collaborating to go to each other's physical locations to meet and to support students is really helpful. And lastly, you want to avoid silos. Obviously, we all know there's a lot of disconnect sometimes between the academic and athletic side of the house. And so one of those things that we're looking for is how can we eliminate those barriers in collaboration and communication between these two areas. So we used a framework from sociology called ethnomethodology. And this is how people make sense of the world around them. So it's pretty straightforward. We study human interaction and communication essential to this collaborative process. And so you create this shared language and you become natives through social exchange. And a lot of collaboration and communication is how you learn about each other's work and how you learn about each other's processes. So it's very common in athletics to say PTD. We all know what that means, but a campus advisor may not know that's progress toward degree. So there's 4 concepts in this framework. So we're going to review these briefly here, and then we'll talk about them a lot more in results. Accounts are the ways advisors describe their interactions and make sense of the behavior around them. The reflexivity is this back and forth interaction between advisors on campus. You might be playing the game to kind of understand how to like satiate the other group. If you're in athletics and you need something from an advisor, you might use certain language that you've gathered from talking to someone to be able to get what you need from that advisor. Indexicality is meaning derived through that interaction. So this is how I can work with someone who doesn't necessarily believe the same thing I believe or approach students the same way I approach students as an advisor. And then lastly, the et cetera principle is developing a shared understanding of meaning. So that means like, I know you so well at this point that I can finish your sentence, or I know what you're saying when you're like, I need that form. So those are kind of the things we'll touch on when we get through our interviews. So we have 4 research questions. How do athletic and campus advisors communicate about college athletes' academic pursuits or progress? Are there barriers to communication between these advisors? In what way do they build relationships with each other? And how do they collaborate to support athletes? Will's going to take over here and talk about our methodology.
Right. So how did we explore all of this is kind of what our methodology covers. So we started by sort of soliciting participation through, I think, N4A, NACADA memberships and various avenues, and conducted what ended up being 28 semi-structured interviews with full-time campus and athletic advisors from across the United States. Semi-structured in the sense that we went into them with some established questions that we knew we wanted to have answered, but we gave participants the latitude to kind of expand in different areas and maybe add, hey, here's something that is pertinent to this conversation that I'm seeing on my campus that I want to talk a little bit about as well. And then latitude for us to be able to ask some follow-up questions if they mention something that may not have been covered in our initial question list. We recorded all of our interviews, so we did not have video going whatsoever during any of these interviews. It was audio recordings only, and then we sent those recordings in to be transcribed using Scribby so that we could then conduct a paper-based analysis afterwards. So that involved Dr. Rubin and I both sitting down and individually going through all 28 transcripts, coding all 28 transcripts, highlighting quotes that we felt were meaningful or pertinent to our research questions. And then we met together to kind of go over what we had individually come up with, compare notes, so to speak. We reached a consensus essentially regarding those notes relevant to our research questions. And then ultimately, when we prepared to begin writing out our research, we assigned all participants a pseudonym. So participant information, who were the 28 participants? 17 of them were athletic advisors, and the other 11 were campus advisors. So again, we're defining campus advisors as faculty advisors or primary role or professional advisors. So 17 athletic, 11 campus. 6 of our participants are from private institutions, 22 from public institutions. And then 27 of our 28 participants were NCAA D1 institution advisors. So 12 of those were at FBS Power 5 institutions, 4 at FBS Group of 5 institutions, 7 at FCS institutions, and then 4 at non-football institutions. We did have the lone NCAA D2 institution participant as well. So getting into our results a little bit, going back to the 4 major concepts of ethnomethodology, we're going to start with accounts. And as a reminder, accounts discuss the ways that advisors describe their interactions and make sense of their behavior within them. So focusing first on communication and liaison models, one of the things that we quickly realized in talking to participants are that some participants had these liaison models that they would establish as a means of communicating across campus with their counterparts. So in some cases, one participant used software such as Microsoft Teams to organize and streamline their liaison efforts. So that could be organizing meetings or simply establishing a quick method of communication. And we'll talk about modes of communication here shortly. Mentor programs for new staff members was another option, and then a liaison model wherein each athletic advisor would be assigned to 2 colleges. So if there were, say, 6 or 7 athletic advisors, each one would take 2 colleges at their university and act as the liaison with those 2 colleges to bring information back to their athletic advising unit. So these were just some of the interesting things, communication and liaison models that some of our participants reported to us. In terms of average time communicating weekly, most participants said they spent anywhere from 1 to 3 hours per week communicating with an advising counterpart across campus. So that's a campus advisor communicating with an athletic advisor or vice versa, 1 to 3 hours per week. For some, they may communicate daily based on how physically close they are on campus. So that did tend to play a role, and we'll discuss that a little bit later in our results. But then others reported that the only time they ever spoke to their counterparts on campus was during high registration periods or high traffic periods wherein that communication was a little bit more necessary. Looking at modes of communication, so not terribly surprising, but email was the universal mode for advisors to communicate. I think this was pretty much standard across the board with all of our participants. Why that might be the case, so throughout the results, we'll kind of highlight some different quotes that might explain some of these different things. So in the case of this participant, I try to get stuff in writing as much as possible as well. So that's a scenario where if it's really something that needs to be documented, I'll follow up with an email after speaking with them either in person or on the phone just to confirm and verify everything. So it was reflected in our results that there was this desire to sort of encapsulate anything that might have been said verbally to sort of have that documentation for later. And that seemed to be I think, developing theme with a lot of our participants to have that documentation. Of course, every other manner of communication was represented in some way as a mode of communicating: phone calls, face-to-face meetings, using campus listservs, instant messaging like Microsoft Teams I referred to earlier, and advisor note systems, which we'll talk a little bit on here shortly. Face-to-face meetings might occur between advisors when newer advisors arrive on campus, such as a veteran advisor taking a new advisor out for coffee. We had at least one participant who referenced this as being something that they personally just like to do with newer advisors on their campus, especially if they hear that there's a campus advisor, as an athletic advisor, taking that campus advisor out and saying, hey, I may need to rely on you a little bit later on, but I do want to get to know you professionally and kind of know where you're coming from. And that way they can establish that relationship early on, and it helps to feed into and foster that productivity later. As far as note systems are concerned, so we did want to kind of explore this topic of internal advisor note systems and what campuses are using them, what aren't, what are some of the barriers that might arise surrounding those note systems. So we did find that some institutions simply do not have any internal note systems. Some have one, and then there are others who have at least 2 separate systems. So some issues that arose from that included the lack of mandatory use of those systems, the access to notes between campus advising units and athletic advising units, whether or not those units had the same or similar access to the same note system, or whether or not they had completely separate access to their own separate systems. Lack of use by faculty advisors was noted by some of our participants, as well as confusion between what's even supposed to go in each system when there are multiple systems to input notes into. So it can get very confusing very fast. 79% of our participants reported having at least one campus advising notes system, so a majority where information might about advising meetings could be recorded and stored. but only 32% of those 22 who had a system reported that their systems were either ineffective or undergoing improvements or were not accessible by all advisors on campus. So a minority of those who had systems, said that their systems weren't working. So while that might be a positive, it's still 32% saying that this isn't even working for me, even though we have it. One participant at an institution said they used a cloud storage system for uploading notes and documents that advisors and coaches could then access. One of their quotes, I think that the note system would be more effective if everyone on campus used the same one and used it consistently. And that seemed to be a pretty prevalent theme, is just that consistency that might be missing when there are multiple systems. We've got two systems, one system specifically for advising staff, which has an open section and then a private section. And if they've been designated an advisor, they can see it. If not, they cannot see any of it, but they have a system which they report in, which I can see and they can see, but I don't have to report in that system. So again, I think this quote kind of underlies some of the confusion and kind of the extra knowledge that it takes to know what to put, where to put it, who can access it, when I need to share something, what can be hidden. So it creates a lot of this lack of transparency in some cases. At one institution, lower division campus advisors are required to use their campus note system, but then when that student declares a major and moves into sort of an upper division level, oftentimes that's when a faculty advisor might take over for that upper division advising. All of a sudden, the information tends to stop being as prevalent. It's not really showing up in that note system as much as it was when that student was meeting with a lower division campus advisor. So this was another instance where faculty advisors kind of bared a little bit of scrutiny as far as including and following up with that information that, say an athletic or even another campus advisor might be hoping to have seen in there. If campus advisors limit access to athletic advisors and vice versa, then information sharing is incomplete, which could result in problems with athlete academic progress. This is sort of, I think, one of the biggest takeaways with this note system is that we got to have that transparency as advisors collectively in order to make this work, in order to be able to support one another. Oftentimes, we don't have time to hop on the phone or send a quick email and hope that another individual receives that. So those note systems, if you have them, are a viable way for us to exchange information about a student before and after meeting with them, and making sure that there is consistent information being shared across campus. So next, we looked a little bit into differentiation of roles and titles, which we talked a little bit about in the literature review earlier. So again, advisors must try to find consensus about processes and roles in their efforts to support students. So we need to know what we're about, right? As advisors, what are we even trying to accomplish on our campuses, and are we duplicating efforts? What kind of cross-training needs to take place in order to fill some of those gaps with the students' information seeking? So there is a shared misunderstanding that was representative in our results that existed between campus advisors and athletic advisors about their perceived roles, motivations, intentions, and working with student athletes. Athletic advisors in many D1 athletic programs tend to have smaller caseloads of students than campus advisors. So some of the athletic advisors that we talked to expressed concern that they felt like the perception was that they were doing less work because they had this lower number, which I think if you're an athletic advisor, you know that 60, 70 athletes compared to 300 students that maybe another advisor is only meeting with once per semester, obviously there's probably similar amount of work going on, but that number doesn't reflect that. And if the campus advisor isn't aware of what the roles are with that number, that could be something that affects perception and productivity on campus. So a recurring theme from athletic advisors is that faculty advisors in particular are not engaged. That's something that we just consistently heard from most of our athletic advisors in discussing campus and faculty advisors, that faculty advisors were simply not engaged. Differentiation of titles may help students better understand the roles of having both an athletic advisor and campus advisor support. So this is a case where not just understanding from a campus advisor standpoint, what do my athletic advising colleagues even do on the other side of campus, but from a student standpoint, what are these two individuals even trying to accomplish here? And what role are they trying to serve in my pursuit of a degree on this campus? And why is one telling me one thing, one telling me another, or why do they not seem to be aware of one another? So having those differentiation of roles can help that student, and it can also help the other advisor on campus to kind of be able to tell the difference between what is this individual trying to do versus the other. So multiple participants made clear to us that their role is that of athletic counselor, not simply athletic advisor, in order to sort of define this distinction for their students. Student has an, say in my case, an intended business advisor. They also have an athletic counselor. It kind of helps them to delineate who is who. And then one participant saw their role of academic advisor change to academic eligibility specialist. So even more defined, and I think even more indicative of what their role is on campus, both to their campus advising counterparts as well as their students. And now we'll get a little bit into reflexivity. So we've covered accounts. Reflexivity, again, is the sort of, we produce order by making meaning of our work behaviors. And it's that sort of back and forth, those interactions, right? So looking at why we even communicate, our reasons for communication. So one of the most simple, I think, that we received from just about everybody was course registration issues. I have a student who needs to get into this course, can't get into this course, it's full, it doesn't work with their practice schedule. How do we resolve this? As well as verifying curriculum requirements. So, hey, if they take accounting in the spring as opposed to the fall, is that going to throw them off? What are the curriculum requirements? Transfer course evaluations was another very common, I think, answer that we received. So you have a student transferring in, a student athlete transferring in. Where can these courses count? What can they be evaluated as, rather than being a simple transfer credit that drops out of their audit entirely? Inclusion of campus advisors and on-campus recruiting events was another reason for communication. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, especially in our implications, but some campus advisors reported that they would be reached out to on behalf of a coach or an athletic association to say, hey, can you meet with a prospective student athlete while they're on campus to talk about your program? Status of a student in their 4-year plan. So essentially, are they even close to getting this done within 4 years? Is it going to take 5 years? Are they ahead of schedule? Where do they stand within the standpoint of their curriculum? And to that end, graduation plans. How far are they from graduating? And what do they need to get done? Talking about barriers to that process then. So if those are the reasons that they communicate, what are the barriers that are preventing that communication from occurring? One advisor or participant said that they have this situation on their campus where they simply aren't aware if a student drops a course. They're not notified in any way by the registrar's office, which I think we can all agree is kind of an issue. If a student athlete talks to, say, their campus advisor, and campus advisor agrees, yeah, from my standpoint, you can drop this course, and that student is authorized to then go drop that course, and that athletic advisor has no knowledge of that occurring, that's going to throw some things off and potentially cause some catastrophes. So that can be a barrier when the institutional processes don't necessarily keep everybody in the loop, and the campus advisor may not know to say, hey, before we do this, let's check with your athletic advisor so we're not missing anything. Not able to edit degree audits. So again, athletic advisors kind of had this shared sort of discomfort maybe with not being able to edit degree audits, move things where they need to go, especially courses that could count in multiple different areas, in order to kind of help balance out those audits, especially come time to sort of review for PTD and things like that. They're instead having to reach out to campus advisors or other units to say, hey, can you do this for us? I don't really have time to explain why. Can we just move through this process? So it's creating barriers to not only extra communication that has to occur, but they're having to constantly explain themselves over and over again as to why they need things done. Some campus advisors will not meet with students until they have applied to and been accepted into a major, making the planning process difficult. This was another one that we heard, I think, a few different times, that they have a student athlete who wants to explore something like, say, engineering, like a business degree where you have to go through certain hoops in order to apply to that major, but they can't even meet with that specific advisor to talk about what that would look like long-term until they've actually been accepted. So it's, again, an institutional process or policy that's kind of creating this hang-up from that student getting the information that they need, and that campus advisor maybe not understanding, okay, this is why this student really needs to have that conversation now, but I don't want to have it because I'm not doing that with every other student beyond student athletes. Disconnect between veteran and newer advisors and administration. So this is another one where if you have a long entrenched athletic advisor or long entrenched campus advisor, they've gotten so used to doing things in a certain manner, in a certain way, and especially with, say, their counterpart unit on campus. As a campus advisor at a campus for 20 years, and they've gotten used to working with athletics in a certain way, and all of a sudden there's a lot of turnover in the athletic advising side, and all these newer advisors are coming in, or a new director coming in trying to do things differently, and all of a sudden that damages communication because things have just changed after 20 years. That can impact communication. That's a barrier to process. And then this is one that I know I certainly experienced on my own, but that we heard from our participants: sense of urgency of an athletic department versus the lack thereof on other parts of campus. So if you've worked in athletics and you've worked on the academic side, then you know that they run at two different speeds. Athletics usually wants to get things done as quickly as they can. And, you know, sometimes the requests don't come in until maybe a few hours before it needs to get done. And that's not always feasible, or it's not always expected to get done in that rate of speed on the academic side. So that's another thing that can sometimes leave a bad taste in campus advisors' mouths when they're asked to do something, to meet with a recruit who is coming into campus tomorrow. And it's like, well, can you just clear your schedule to meet with them? No, maybe not. So that sense of urgency can be a barrier. Miscommunication. Athletic advisors and campus advisors are not always on the same page with a student. So this is probably one of the biggest areas where I think participants reflected that miscommunications occur. That the student might hear one thing from their athletic advisor and then hear something different from their campus advisor, or the student might be telling an athletic advisor one thing and telling a campus advisor something different, and all of a sudden everybody's completely off the same page. One-way communication. So instances in which, you know, athletic advisors may be asking campus advisors for a lot of information. I'll go ahead and post these right here. Asking campus advisors for a lot of information about a degree program, about a student, and the campus advisor gives that information to the athletic advisor, but then there's no follow-up. There's no feedback. There's no explanation of, hey, thanks for this. The student's now going to do this thing over here. There's just that one-way request of, hey, just send me all the information here. But we also have instances where faculty will send feedback, or such as grade reports to athletic departments, and just never hear back about, you know, do we need to change anything? Are things working? Is this good information to give to these students? Campus advisors get parameters from athletic advisors, but seem to not get to provide input on the students' educational and career plans beyond that cursory advising meeting. So again, it gives that feeling of, hey, I'm meeting with the student once per semester. You're clearly meeting with them more, but I'm not really given a chance to be involved in the process more than that. It's that one-way communication. Another thing that we heard from, I think, athletic advisors a lot is that faculty advisors are just not always up to date on what is and isn't being offered each semester. So it's that instance where, you know, they meet with that faculty advisor, especially as an upper division student, they go to register, and 2 or 3 of those courses that were recommended just aren't even being offered that fall. And all of a sudden you're having to scramble to find out, well, what else can they be doing? Does this affect their plan? So it's that being out of the loop from faculty advisors that can create some miscommunication as well. Misconception of athletes and their academic support. So this idea of one-size-fits-all academic policies that limit advisors' understanding of special populations. So I think this really pertains to first-year students, and obviously we've heard about this. I don't know that campus advisors fully appreciate the gap that exists between the incoming profile of a lot of our student athletes, especially on our higher needs teams, and how or why that gap might be between them and the typical student who's getting access to our institution. So when you have institutions where they sort of have kind of made everything for one specific academic profile of student, and then you have a student athlete who may not quite be there. They may have gone through that special admissions process to get in. You have this gap that forms, and it creates this misconception on the parts of students or on the parts of advisors as to why that gap might exist. Campus advisors have witnessed athletes being placed in courses they do not choose or in programs that do not align with interests. So this is another thing that we heard, I think, from multiple participants, campus advisors specifically, that they simply saw students be placed in courses that were never recommended, and that for whatever reason, the student just didn't have an interest in either. So another quote from one of our participants: "Sometimes I feel like the academics may not be the top priority there, being in athletics. We have also found some scenarios among student athletes across our majors in our college where we find students taking courses that don't really seem relevant to their interests or their career goals or things like that. And when we ask them or look into it, they say that they were either placed in that class or told they needed to register for that class from their athletic advisor." So this sort of sows those seeds of distrust at that point when that seems to occur. Campus advisors reported that they do not understand why athletes cannot take certain classes because of their travel schedules. So something that may seem obvious to somebody who either works in athletics or even just watches, participates in athletics from a fan standpoint, there are plenty of campus advisors that don't do that. They're not that engaged, and so they don't always understand what the travel demands are. Some campus advisors believe athletic advisors only see athletes as money-making opportunities rather than as people. And this quote sort of summates that. "The athletic counselors do a good job in terms of making sure athletes go to class, making sure they're tracking what's going on in their day-to-day. And sometimes I feel bypassed because they'll make a decision on behalf of the student because it's what's best for the sport and the student moving forward, but not necessarily what the student might have indicated that they wanted." So the examples provided by participants suggest that there are detriments to lack of access or timely collaboration for advisors to be successful in their roles. And reflexivity, so focusing on relationship building and trust between the athletic department and campus. We asked some pointed questions of our participants about trust, specifically trust and support and trust and communication. So we'll cover these over the next few slides. So trust and support. Athletic advisors did indicate that they trust the campus advisors know the specifics on degree programs and curricula better than they as athletic advisors do. If athletic advisors get out and interact on campus, the negative stigma about the athletic department and its relationship to education lessens. So the more present, the more involved those athletic advisors tend to be, the more that trust builds with their campus advisor colleagues. So I want to mention, we had a few participants who highlighted invitations to participate in recruiting events. We had at least one participant mention a guest coach recognition. They got to participate as a guest coach for one of their teams. And this carried a lot of weight with those campus advisors, that involvement, that invitation to be involved on the athletic side beyond simply meeting with a student athlete once or a couple of times per semester. Some other things that came out from participants: ice cream socials, open houses, coffee hours, just these creation of opportunities for academic advisors, campus advisors to participate with athletic advisors, just creating that atmosphere for that cross-campus collaboration, built that trust and support. And then trust in communication. One campus advisor did not trust the football advisors after they changed student schedules and majors after her advising appointments. So for one of these participants, that was damaging to their experience with their athletic department. It was damaging to how they view their athletic department moving forward and how they might view student athletes moving forward. So it erodes that trust when they recommend one thing and all of a sudden that student's not necessarily pursuing that and they're doing a different schedule. One campus advisor has had no trouble with athletic advisors, said she's willing to work with them to ensure students meet PTD, understands they might get frustrated if she does not immediately suggest an interdisciplinary program. And ultimately, sort of similar to trust and support, trust is built over time through back and forth communications. So it's a two-way street. It's not one side has to go more than the other. It's both sides need to go back and forth and meet in the middle. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa and let her pick up at indexicality.
Thank you, Will. And so indexicality, again, is about context and developing relationships around that. So physical location and reporting lines was one of those things we talked about in the literature review as well. Some of the things we found from this quote: it would be nice if the athletic academic advisors were closer so we could just pop in, because I would certainly be talking to them more if they weren't located so far away, which is obviously a positive here. 9 of the 17 athletic advisors report to an academic or administrative unit outside of the athletic department. They're actually housed in athletic facilities. And one of our participants called this a satellite location, which I thought was really clever. I do think that's unique because the reporting line shows one thing, the location shows another. And that's, I guess, a higher number than I expected. And then we had 9 report to so provost, VP, AP, those are those 9. And then the remaining, we had 4 to athletic directors, 2 to a centralized advising unit director, 1 in student affairs, and then 1 had a dual reporting line, 50-50 to provost and athletic director. And the athletic advisors reported that if they are leading to an academic affairs unit, they get legitimacy, especially to faculty advisors that they collaborate with. So some campus advising models, we saw that it's pretty complicated because a lot of the people have a mix of professional staff advisors or primary role advisors and faculty advisors. And they find that if they have a professional staff advisor that's in an advising center that's unavailable, they can call someone else in that center and get help. But if it's a faculty member, they can't call like a sociology faculty member that's not the student's advisor, because that student information would not be with another faculty member. So it's harder to find a backup for that information. So a lot of campuses seem to have a mix, like a hybrid of those 2 campus advising models. At our only Division II institution, the campus advisor actually supports athletes in her caseload within a centralized advising unit, but has like very little interaction with athletics. Sometimes she'll talk to a coach about a student's academics, but there's no other person that she would talk to there, which is kind of interesting. And then one of the Division I directors we talked to said that they are situated within a centralized advising center so much that they rarely communicate with athletics. And they found that athletics was frustrated with this model, but they loved it. This is actually at a private institution. Students start with a freshman studies unit, and then they move from a freshman studies advisor to a faculty advisor as sophomores, while also having an athletic advisor. So there's just like endless number of models. We didn't find one to be like the perfect formula to give you, unfortunately, but there's a lot of different ideas, and we go more broadly in our article about this, which hopefully will be out very soon, and we'll share it with the N4A listserv so you can read more about models and quotes from our participants. So priority of campus advising versus athletic advising. This is really hard for us to put into words, but what order do you see the advisors? Do you go to the campus advisor first and then the athletic advisor, or vice versa? So several had both, different models, different perspectives on it. You go to the athletic advisor first as a primary until they're declared, and then to the primary role advisor, but then others had, various perspectives on it. And there's no right or wrong answer here, but we'll share some suggestions. So in a couple models, students had to go to campus advising office to get a PIN number for registration. And like a lot of athletic advisors said, okay, they're going and the department administrative assistant is giving them a PIN number and telling them to leave. They don't have to see an advisor. They get their hold lifted and then they can just register. So there's like potential for misadvisement or information missing for the student to make decisions with the athletic advisor. So they felt that the student should go to the athletic advisor first. And then in other cases, students aren't even required to go to the campus advisor at all on that campus. And so they don't make the effort to make those appointments. And then in other places, campus advisors, again, are seen as primary, athletic as secondary, because it helps relationships on campus, which like eliminating the tension between athletics and campus. And then there's that idea that athletic advisors then don't have the pressure of trying to know every degree program on campus, because they could then misadvise a student. The campus relationships improved at one institution where a new associate athletic director came in and required all the athletes to go to campus advisors first. And this was such a new concept on this campus that the relationships improved dramatically when we talked to one of the faculty advisors there. So now we're into et cetera principle, our last kind of area of analysis of our results. And this is kind of where you like find a way to develop relationships where you can kind of work together with incomplete information, or like I said, finish each other's sentences. So we started looking at advisor staff meetings, forums, and councils. So 71% of participants in our study have active advising forums or councils on their campus. Most of them, though, were unsure if athletic advisors were invited to attend. And a lot of people said if they were in a meeting, I don't know if I would recognize them. So that's a problem with not being introduced around when someone's hired, or kind of leaving that whole athletic advising unit out of the kind of advising culture on campus. Some athletic advisors sent one representative from their unit to those monthly meetings. Usually they're about monthly, if they could get someone involved. 39% of our participants were invited to participate in staff meetings, but that were 10 athletic advisors invited to campus advising meetings, and only one campus advisor invited to athletic advisor meetings, which is a very low number. So we got to do a better job of welcoming them into our units. There were some that have standing invitations for those undeclared advising centers or centralized advising centers, so people could just come every week if they'd like. And then several participants were like, hey, I invited myself to a staff meeting just because I just needed to get myself there or to get more information. One of them had an improper certification infractions case on their campus, so they felt like they just needed to go and like make the relationship happen even if they weren't invited, which I thought was pretty awesome. And other examples that we saw were quarterly retreats, collaborating, bringing campus advisors into summer bridge programming for new athletes coming in the summer, and then doing some kind of meet and greet in the athletic advising center for all campus advisors. So rules education, we went all the way back to the beginning and talked about this kind of lack of information that campus advisors may have. Most participants felt like if campus advisors had access to rules education, it would be mutually beneficial, because then everyone would have a general understanding of continuing eligibility, initial eligibility, and kind of the needs to graduate in a certain time frame. 36% of our participants have rules education that they offer to campus advisors either annually or each semester, which is a good sign. But you see that there's not a lot of knowledge about it, again, like with faculty advisors, and if they do know, they may not remember and they don't go. One example, a director mentioned in our study provides rules updates to every advising center director in a monthly meeting, which we thought was a good model as well. And then that can trickle down from units. And then one offers Q&A sessions for different campus units, but they don't actually get help from the compliance office when they do this. And I think if academics and compliance work together, it'd probably be a lot easier. And then, yeah, like lastly, like our faculty advisors didn't have no clue. Even if there was the offering of rules out on campus, they didn't know about it. And if they heard about it, they didn't seem to remember. So that's something that we should keep track of, especially for campuses with a lot of faculty advisors. Some innovative practices that we saw, we liked this a lot. Several participants said they were honored to participate on search committees when hiring advisors from other units. And that was a really good way to get feel like valued with their input. Another institution had a big review of academic advising for their whole campus. So they looked at their leadership structure, how advisors were trained, what the note system was like, or if they had one, if they had a counselor, if they needed to establish it, and then what kinds of professional development were offered to advisors. And this is a good way to like bring in all advisors together and kind of standardize some of the practices and language around advising. So we really liked this idea. And you can probably do it internally without hiring a consultant if budget is an issue, which it usually is. And then athletic advisors are supporting campus advisors during new student orientation. So it doesn't matter if there's no athletes at orientation, they're going there and helping students with questions and registration, which we thought was a great model. Another suggestion that people had was to establish liaisons for different colleges. So if you want to double check that students are meeting all of the PTD requirements, you can go to have a point person in each college for that, and that would make sure that everybody's on the same page with the student. And then one really cool idea at an institution was to have this advising athletes committee, and that's made up of campus and athletic advisors that share ideas, provide support, and they offer monthly trainings on campus to advisors who are interested. So I thought that was a really cool collaborative idea. And then another thought, reporting lines are pretty stuck usually, but consider having athletic advisors report to centralized advising. So they're seen as a primary role advisor for a student population, just like other primary role advisors are seen. So I'm going to hand it over to Will for implications.
Unmuting myself helps. So kind of getting to the tail end of this part, implications for campus advisors. So any campus advisors that happen to be on the webinar, this is for you. Include athletic advisors and orientation sessions and registration for all students. So this is an opportunity that, depending on your campus and your campus setup, if time allows, invite some of those athletic advisors to participate in, say, your orientation presentations, or for the registration process for all students, not just athletes. Kind of welcome them into the grander scheme to kind of get a feel for what's going on campus beyond just athletics. Something else that I know we had one participant highlight this, they meet with, as a campus advisor, meet with an athletic advisor and the student all at the same time, and they sort of go through the orientation and registration process together collectively. And I think that kind of helps set the tone for, hey, this is a partnership. It sets the tone for that student to understand that these two individuals are going to be part of a collective support system sort of in my corner. I think that also helps to dispel some of the difference between you two are giving me two different bits of information versus it's kind of like going to a doctor where I'm just getting two different opinions, and I, as the student, get to decide which one do I feel suits me best, what direction do I need to go in, what's going to be in my best interest. So kind of including athletic advisors in that orientation part of the schedule might be beneficial. Improve advising note sharing and access for athletic advisors. So if you're not already sharing your advising notes as a campus advisor with your athletic advisors, I'd recommend doing that. Establish a point person in your advising center to liaise with the athletic department. So especially if you realize that there's just a lot of confusion surrounding student athletes in your department, consider establishing an individual to be the person to go and talk with the athletic advisors or the athletic administrators about what you're seeing, try and get answers. That could be a good way to start developing a cross-campus relationship. Invite athletic advisors to staff meetings to update them on curriculum changes, build rapport between units. Again, use the structures that you already have within your office to go ahead and invite athletic advisors into your space and allow them a chance to present on what they're doing, how they're seeing things, what do campus advisors on your campus need to know from them. Extend that invitation. Seek opportunities to understand the day-to-day lives of college athletes and the role of athletic advisors. So twofold, and there's another bullet point down here about kind of doing informational interviews, and I'll kind of just jump down to that really quick. If you don't know any of your athletic advisors and you're a campus advisor, get to know them. Schedule informational interviews with them. That's a little bit formal, but it helps. It really does. I've done it myself. It's a good way to understand the person, not just the role. So doing something like that is certainly beneficial. And seeking opportunities to understand the day-to-day lives of college athletes. There are a lot of professional development opportunities that are out there. N4A is partnered with NCAA on a professional development course that's taught during the summer. There's also just a wealth of literature out there about academics and student athletes. And if you are a campus advisor and you don't even know where to start, at the end of this, we're going to share our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to give anybody at least some places to maybe start from, or some places to seek answers to questions you might have. Participate in any trainings or brown bag sessions offered by athletics. Y'all, if your athletic department is already putting stuff out there, go to it, go participate in it. You need to go learn from the source, learn about what your student athletes are doing and who they're receiving that information from across campus. So if that is already out there, sees what is already available, that also gives a positive impression to athletics that, hey, there is interest from the academic side of our campus to grow and to learn and to know us better and to know our students better. So please go participate in anything that already is available on your campus and give them feedback. If the training didn't feel like it was comprehensive enough, or there are certain things that you would like to know more about, communicate that to them. They can only grow and develop their processes if you communicate to them as a cross-campus colleague. Invite athletic advisors to coffee and a conversation. So the less formal version of maybe doing some informational interviews is just ask your athletic advisor that you may work with or email with a lot about a certain team that you might see in your program. Ask them if they just want to go get a cup of coffee on campus for 30 or 45 minutes. Get to know them as a person. Again, goes down to, like, I think, demystifying our campuses. never be afraid, especially if you work on your campus, never be afraid of your athletic association. That's, I think, the most foolish thing any of us can do. Ask questions if you have them and get to know the people that work there. They're colleagues on your campus, they're employees on your campus, same as you, and they're educational professionals. So extend the opportunity to say, hey, I just want to know more about you as a person. How'd you arrive to this campus? How did you arrive into the role that you're in? Can we just meet up somewhere and get to know one another a little bit better? Again, I've said schedule an informational interview, so I won't belabor that point. So instead, I'm going to hand it back over to Lisa briefly to talk about implications for athletic advisors.
Thanks, Will. And you can go ahead and put all the points up there because I know we're getting to Q&A in just a moment. So you want to plan visits to advising offices if they're located far away from your facilities. Invite campus advisors into recruiting activities in Summer Bridge, but with advance notice, not the day before, especially if you're asking them to come on a Saturday. Co-develop trainings with campus advisors like that model we just talked about to educate the campus advising community on athletes' academic and advising needs. We like the liaison model, so just like we're telling campus advisors to do that, we're thinking the same thing, like have a liaison to a business college in athletics, have a liaison to an engineering program, and so forth. Offer those rules education programs regularly and make sure people know about them, get the word out to every advisor, not just sending it to a director and hope they forward it on. Recognize your colleagues for their efforts. So again, the faculty advisor that was honored as a guest coach really loved that. I mean, everybody likes to be recognized, and that could mean a lot to them. And it's a small gesture, doesn't cost anything. So I encourage you to think about that more. And then intentionally follow up with your advisors if students change their plans after meeting with them, so they know why the student doesn't have the schedule or major that they thought the student would have, so they feel like they're part of the conversation. Just as Will mentioned earlier, that partnership really is key. So he's going to finish up our last slide on advising administration, and then we will take some questions. Thank you.
So I'll do the same thing, put them all up there. And some of these may be a little bit more obvious than others, so I won't go too into depth, but conduct a comprehensive review of academic advising. If you haven't done that lately, now's probably as good a time as any to kind of look at what your processes are and how is that promoting cross-campus collaboration. Consider a standardized training for all advisors on campus with information regarding academic policies and curriculum requirements. I think this applies both on the campus administrative side and the athletic administrative side. If you're not offering an opportunity to invite others into your space to learn about what your expertise is and what your unit is all about, establish that training regimen. It's only going to be helpful for the whole ecosystem of your campus. Introduce newly hired advisors in all units to the entire advising community. I know on a large campus like mine, this is especially frustrating when, say, an athletic advisor leaves and I don't hear about it until about a year later, and I'm trying to email somebody that may not even exist anymore, or I meet with a student who they're confused when I'm referring to an athletic advisor that they've never met with because they were never there. So make sure that you are introducing those advisors some way, somehow, be it through an academic listserv or actually bringing that individual to functions on campus where they might get a lot of visibility with other advisors on campus. Again, I think that goes for both the campus side and the athletic side. Foster interaction through an advising council or forum with monthly meetings and intentional staff meeting invitations and open houses. Again, if you already have established things like an advising forum or you have these monthly staff meetings, invite the other side of campus to come to these and participate with your staff. Again, it's about increasing that visibility, which increases that communication and increases that trust. Make sure all advisors understand which order athletes should see their support system. So in other words, should a student athlete be going to their campus advisor before going to the athletic advisor, vice versa? And more importantly, does the student athlete know that that's the order that they should expect to do that in, and why? What's the logic behind that order? Again, there's no right or wrong answer there, as Lisa said earlier, but make sure that everybody is aware of what the order is and why that order might be the thing that's encouraged. Introduce a mentor program, connecting veteran advisors and new advisors across units, and include athletic advisors in this program. So I know on my campus, we have an academic advising mentor program, including athletic advisors in that as well, sort of builds that inclusivity across campus. Encourage all advisors to share advising notes, especially faculty advisors. Got to get those notes in there. It's too crucial for everybody else to be able to see that. and have athletic advisors serve on a campus advisor search committee and vice versa. When you need that third option, that third opinion, that unbiased opinion on a search committee, consider your athletic advising colleagues for those opportunities and vice versa. So flew through those implications a little bit. So if you have questions or ideas, now can sort of be when we take those. Our information is up here. So Lisa's is on the left, mine is on the right. We also have Lisa's Twitter account on the bottom left. I don't have a Twitter for reasons I won't get into, but on the bottom right, that is a bit.ly to my LinkedIn if you would like to connect there as well. So I will turn it over and we can take some questions.
Thank you, presenters, for all of your insight and for sharing some phenomenal information with today's participants. At this time, we will have a few minutes to take a couple of questions. Please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen to pose a question, and we will attempt to answer as many questions as possible for the top of the hour. Our first question says, on my particular campus, our student athletes are given priority registration but require a PIN number. Often I found that our campus advisors are reluctant to provide that for our athletes in order for them to register in time.
You want to take it, Lisa?
And that's sure. I mean, it's unfortunate because priority registration, of course, is a really nice perk of being an athlete. And there's other groups that have it, including like when I was a student worker, I got that. And so I think there might be a misconception, like, well, why does this student get to go before my students or whatever? So that's part of that education, I think, that needs to be done. Like, this is why it's that misunderstanding of travel schedules and misunderstanding of the time demands of athletes. And that, you know, we had a participant say, like, we did this day in the life of an athlete presentation that was so well received on campus. They had a really top student who was an engineering major talk about how she balances everything, and that opened a lot of people's eyes. And I think people still just see athletes one way if they have those negative perceptions. So that goes back to, like, how can we do a better job of educating our campus as to why athletes have different perks and support services than other students.
Thank you. The next question says, wonderful ideas. How to transition some of these suggestions in a COVID environment, i.e. educational sessions, brown bags, ice cream socials. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll speak to this a little bit because I do a lot with sort of committees and things on campus, and that's something that I'm already having to think ahead on, is how we're going to conduct that in a safe but efficient manner. So, I mean, we're all proficient with Zoom at this point. So in terms of hosting those brown bags and obviously a webinar like this, I mean, this is kind of a living option that we all have that we can use to still foster that communication. I think the nice thing about this is that it is efficient. It does allow for communication. It allows us to record our meetings a little bit easier so we can share them with multiple people. So I would certainly say rely on the technology, lean into at least the capabilities that we now have as a result of COVID. But it's still not always going to be conducive to what that human element brings, right? When you're in a room together, when you can just drop by a colleague's office and say, hey, I have a quick question for you. I know I do that a lot. I go down to our athletic department for one reason and then end up talking to 4 or 5 other people about 4 or 5 other things. So it's going to have an impact. But making intentional moves, I think, say August, September, October, in my case, we're going to have an advising student athletes committee in the fall, and I'll be reaching out to those advisors and those campus advisors that are interested to say, hey, let's get on a Zoom call together and let's talk about what each side is doing. What are our expectations for our students? How can we get on the same page? What are different units doing? We're a decentralized advising model on our campus, so that's kind of serves 2 sides for me. It's the athletic side. It's also the campus advising side, just to know what's going on.
Thank you. Were any student athletes interviewed? How do you think that could help better understand the academic advising process?
That's a great question. So in this case, we did not interview athletes. There are some studies out there actually already that ask athletes' perceptions of their advising or their advising centers. But you're right, there could be more done in this area, and that's actually an excellent follow-up. So whoever asked that, if you want to reach out to us and do a follow-up study, you know, we're probably down for that. It's been very interesting to work on this and hear from others. It's been about a year since we started interviewing people, so we've it's come a long way, but we were very excited to share a published article with you in the near future. So we look forward to that, and you can get more ideas in writing that you can take with you, as well as quotes from your various advising colleagues that we interviewed that have a lot of different insights. And then, yeah, we'd love to get the student athlete voice too, because it is very confusing for them too if they've never seen, like, why do I have all these people? And it's good to have a lot of people in your corner, but it also can be overwhelming.
Thank you. I think there is one more question in the chat. We will not be able to answer that aloud, but Dr. Rubin, if you will check the chat and follow up with that individual, we greatly appreciate it. So thank you again for everyone's thoughtful questions and participation in today's presentation. Again, if Dr. Rubin or Mr. Lewis, if y'all have any final comments before we conclude, I'll give you a few moments to wrap up before we say bye-bye.
We really appreciate the opportunity to share some research with you, and also thank the N4A and the research committee for the award. So we look forward to hearing comments, and feel free to reach out to either of us via email or LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. On behalf of N4A, its leadership, and the Virtual Education Committee, thank you for taking time out of your day to provide some helpful information and best practices for our membership. Thank you all for participating. Please have a safe and wonderful day.